Welcome to a deep dive into the story of Infosys. It's amazing, right? This company started with just $250, and that was borrowed from a wife too. And it became a global IT giant. Incredible. We have their whole history right here, broken down by chapters. So we're going to go through their founding, their growth, the challenges they faced, leadership changes, and just the overall impact they had. Just imagine starting a tech company back in 1981 India. I mean, that was a time of intense economic restrictions and very limited access to technology.
It is a story of ambition and a ton of resilience, too.
Yeah.
Because these seven founders, they weren't like, your typical Silicon Valley startup guys. We're talking about people coming from very middle-class backgrounds. They all worked together at Pune Computer Systems before this, and they just had this vision that a lot of people considered pretty audacious for the time.
Well, let's jump into that. Chapter 1, the Genesis. It covers 1981 to 1990, and it all began in a Pune apartment.
Exactly. And they pooled their resources, that famous $250. And that was barely enough to even register the company. Talk about bootstrapping, right? They were working out of Narayana Murthy's home, battling India's license raj. It was the system that made getting something as simple as a phone line a 3-year ordeal.
Wow. I can't even imagine the patience you'd need for that. It really shows their commitment.
Absolutely. But their families were a huge part of this, too. There's this really heartwarming story about Murthy's mom. Her name was Visalakshi, and she'd cook meals for the entire team while they were working late into the night. I mean, that's the kind of support system that really keeps a dream alive.
That's amazing. And then their first client, Data Basics Corporation. That was such a pivotal moment. It really validated their idea, right? And it allowed them to finally get their own office.
Yeah, that was a small step, but it was a huge leap forward. It proved that they could actually deliver what they promised, and that they could compete on an international level, even with such limited resources.
Yeah. And then there's the move to Bangalore back in 1983. Bangalore at the time wasn't exactly known as a tech hub, was it? It was called a pensioner's paradise, if I remember correctly.
Yeah. But their arrival in Bangalore really was a sign of things to come, wasn't it? It's amazing how Infosys being there kind of foreshadowed Bangalore becoming what it is today, the Silicon Valley of India. They were pioneers. They really paved the way for a whole industry.
Absolutely. And they were pioneers in another way, too. I mean, they practically invented the whole offshore on-site model, which is so common today. But back then, getting international companies to outsource to India, that was unheard of.
It was. And think about the challenges, right? This was way before the internet as we know it today. It meant really expensive international calls, unreliable communication, and they had to physically send tapes of code by courier. I mean, it took a lot of trust from their clients.
So much trust. They were building that trust from nothing. And not just for themselves, but for India as a place to do business. And their corporate culture played a really big part in that, I think. From the very start, they really emphasized things like meritocracy, transparency, and ethical practices, which those values weren't really that common in the Indian business world at the time.
No, they weren't. It's really remarkable. Those values weren't just, for show. They were deeply ingrained in how they ran their business. They even introduced an employee stock ownership plan, an ESOP, which was almost unheard of in India back then. And it really showed, their commitment to sharing their success and empowering their employees. And this really helped them attract and retain top talent.
Yeah. Their vision, it wasn't just about building a company. It was about building a whole institution. They invested so much in training their employees from the very beginning. They knew their people were their most valuable asset. But it wasn't always easy, right?
No, of course not. They actually faced their first major crisis in 1989. When Ashok Arora, who was one of the founders, he decided to leave. And at the same time, there was an economic slowdown in India, and it really put a lot of pressure on the company, especially because they were still so young. It's really amazing they even survived. But they did even more than that. They came out of it even stronger.
So by the end of the 1980s, they were still relatively small. But they had a solid foundation, hadn't they? They'd weathered these storms, they built a strong reputation, and they were ready for the huge changes that were coming in the next decade.
Oh, and what a decade it was. Chapter 2 covers 1991 to 1998. And that's where we really see the impact of India's economic liberalization. And their growth just takes off. They were really good at seizing opportunities and transforming themselves to meet the demands of a changing world.
So let's get into that. India's liberalization in 1991, that was a game changer for companies like Infosys. It really was. It was like opening the windows and letting in fresh air.
That's a good way to put it. Narayana Murthy himself said it was like oxygen for entrepreneurs. Suddenly, they could import the technology they needed. They could travel more easily. They could access capital. It opened up so many possibilities.
And they really didn't waste any time, did they? In 1993, they went public
Hmm.
on the Bombay Stock Exchange. It wasn't a huge IPO right away. It was even undersubscribed at first, but it was still a crucial step forward.
Yeah, and you know what's really interesting? They decided to use US GAAP for their financial reporting, and they did this years before it became common in India. It was a sign that they wanted to be a global company and that they'd hold themselves to the highest
They
standards.
were already thinking ahead. They knew they needed to have that transparency and credibility as they grew internationally.
Absolutely. And they took their global delivery model, the GDM, to a whole new level. Standardized processes, knowledge management, new collaborative technologies, all designed to, overcome any limitations from geography.
It was really innovative for that time. They were shrinking the world using technology and creating this truly global workforce,
Yeah.
way before remote work became so popular.
Yeah. And then came something that would catapult them to a whole new level of global recognition, the Y2K problem. It might seem small now, but back then, it was a massive global concern. Companies were terrified that their systems would crash when the year 2000 hit.
Yeah, the Y2K bug. It was a perfect opportunity for a company like Infosys. They had the technical skills, they could offer competitive pricing, and their global delivery model was perfectly set up for this kind of challenge.
Their revenue just exploded. It went from $9 million to $121 million in just a few years. They were suddenly working with Fortune 500 companies, and they were proving what they could do on a really large scale. It was their time to shine.
And they seized it. They weren't just this small Indian company anymore. They were a real global player. But even with all this success, they never forgot about their values.
No, they didn't. And in 1996, they started the Infosys Foundation, led by Sudha Murthy, who is Narayana Murthy's wife. This was a huge sign of their commitment to social responsibility. They were using their success to give back to the community. It wasn't all about profits. It was about purpose, too.
That's so important. And their work, focusing on healthcare, education, rural development, and social care, it shows a real belief in making the world a better place.
At the same time, they were busy building their iconic campus in Bangalore. It became a symbol of how powerful India's IT industry was becoming. And also, it was a symbol of their commitment to having a world-class work environment.
Absolutely. But even during this time of incredible growth, they had challenges, like the Asian financial crisis. That was in 1997 and 1998, and it hit the global markets pretty hard.
It did. But you know what? They didn't retreat. They showed how resilient they were. They made sure they had a diverse range of clients. They expanded what they offered. They even went and made a strategic acquisition in the banking sector. And this move, it didn't just help them get through the crisis, it put them in a position for even more growth afterward.
They turned a challenge into an opportunity.
Yeah, exactly. And then they made another bold move. They decided to list on NASDAQ. This was huge for an Indian company back then. It meant they had to prepare meticulously, meet these strict U.S. regulations, and elevate their corporate governance even more. They were setting a whole new standard.
They were definitely ready to play in the big leagues, and by the end of the 1990s, Infosys was a real force in the industry. They had proven themselves, they built a great global reputation, and they were about to become, well, an icon of Indian IT.
That's Chapter 3, from 1999 to 2007. And it's all about that global recognition and rapid expansion. It's a story of ambition, achievement, and how hard it is to manage explosive growth while also staying true to your values.
It has been quite a ride so far.
Oh, it really has, and it just gets more interesting from here. So we left off with Infosys at the top of their game right. They really were a symbol of India's rise in the tech world. But as we get into Chapter 3, from 1999 to 2007, they had to deal with a whole new set of challenges and opportunities. This was a time of global recognition for them and really rapid expansion.
And it all starts with a historic moment. March 11th, 1999. That's when Infosys became the very first Indian company to be listed on NASDAQ. It was a huge symbolic victory, and it put Indian IT on the map globally.
It really did. Their stock just soared on the first day, way past what anyone expected. And they suddenly had a market cap of over $1 billion. They weren't just playing in the big leagues now, they were leading the pack.
And all this was happening during the dot-com bubble, a time when, valuations were crazy, everyone was so optimistic, maybe too optimistic. But Infosys, they always focused on having strong fundamentals and being profitable. They really stood out from all that hype.
Yeah. They were a tech company built on substance, not just speculation. While a lot of companies were burning through cash and taking on loads of debt, Infosys, They stayed careful. And when the bubble burst, which everyone knew it would, they were in a really good place to weather the storm.
It's amazing how they stayed grounded. Amidst all that craziness, they didn't get caught up in all the hype,
Mm.
and that ended up being a really good thing for them.
It was. And they used the dot-com crash as a chance to invest even more, which strengthened their position while other companies were struggling to survive. And they knew they couldn't rely on Y2K work forever. They had to evolve. They had to diversify.
And that's what they did. They moved into new areas. They really emphasized innovation and helping companies transform their businesses. They were moving past just coding. They were becoming real partners for their clients, helping them solve these complex business problems.
Right. They weren't just an outsourcing company anymore. They were providing solutions. They created special units for things like enterprise solutions, systems integration, infrastructure management. They became a one-stop shop for anything IT.
And their global expansion kept going, too, at an incredible speed, really. They opened development centers all over the world, in China, Australia, Europe.
Their expansion into China is a really interesting story. They realized that their model wouldn't work the same way in every market. They had to adapt to different cultures, different ways of doing business, different regulations, but they always had to maintain their core values and keep their high standards for quality.
Yeah, that shows how adaptable they were and how willing they were to learn from different cultures. It's a big reason why they were so successful in a globalized world.
It is, and back in India, they were making major investments in their people. I mean, they knew their employees were their biggest asset. And this led to them creating the Infosys Global Education Center in Mysore. It's a massive place, designed to train thousands of new employees.
It wasn't just about technical skills, was it? It was about teaching people the Infosys culture and values. They knew that having a strong culture was key to their continued success.
Exactly. It was about more than just skills. The Global Education Center, it became the symbol of how committed they were to developing talent. They had this intensive training program. It lasted something like 14 to 23 weeks. New grads would learn technical skills, get industry knowledge, and really understand the Infosys way of working.
It was a huge investment in their people, and you can see how much they grew just by looking at their financials. By 2007, their revenue had gone up to over $3 billion. And it wasn't just the founders who benefited. Thousands of their employees had stock options, so they shared in the wealth.
Yeah, it shows how much they believed in sharing their success with their employees, and they always stuck to good corporate governance and transparency. They went above and beyond what regulations required. They set this really high standard for ethical behavior.
Their reputation was built on integrity and trust, and that was so important for attracting and keeping clients, especially at a time when a lot of companies were involved in scandals.
Exactly. And as they got bigger, they realized that they needed strong leadership development, so they created the Infosys Leadership Institute. It was specifically for identifying and developing future leaders within the company. They were planning for the long term, making sure that the company could succeed even after the founders were gone.
That foresight is really clear in how they handled leadership transitions, too. Like in 2002, when Narayana Murthy stepped down as CEO, Nandan Nilekani, who was another co-founder, took over. It was really carefully planned, and it shows how committed they were to building an institution that would last.
The transition was smooth, too, which shows how well they planned and how strong their leadership pipeline was. And under Nilekani, they continued to grow. I mean, they became a global thought leader in the IT industry.
They were even featured in Thomas Friedman's book, The World is Flat. It highlighted how important they were in shaping the global economy, and it proved that a company from India could really make it on the world stage.
It was a big moment for Infosys, and for India, too. But even with all their success, they knew they couldn't just stand still. The IT world was changing, competition was heating up, and there were all these new technologies emerging.
Yeah, Chapter 4, which covers 2007 to 2014, it's all about how they navigated those new challenges, how they embraced change, and how they prepared for the whole new era of digital transformation. And it starts with another planned change in leadership.
Right. This time, Chris Gopalakrishnan, another co-founder, became the CEO. Each leader brought their own style, but the core values stayed the same. The long-term vision, the focus on excellence, it was all still there.
It's impressive how they manage these transitions. It really says a lot about their culture and their ability to keep that leadership pipeline going to ensure stability.
But they definitely faced some challenges. Just a little over a year into Chris's time as CEO, the financial crisis of 2008 happened, and it really hit the global economy hard.
Yeah, and their clients, especially the ones in banking and finance, they started to cut back on their IT spending. which put pressure on Infosys' revenue and growth.
But they had managed their finances really well. No debt, strong cash reserves. And that turned out to be really important. But they didn't just hunker down and wait for it to pass. They saw this crisis as an opportunity to work even more closely with their clients, helping them through their own tough times.
And they really shifted their focus to efficiency, automation, coming up with innovative ways of doing business. They showed that they were committed to giving their clients real value and not just cutting costs. It was a tough time, but they came out of it stronger and even more resilient.
The financial crisis changed the IT industry for good. And as the economy recovered, the competition was different. There were so many players in the Indian IT market. They were all going after the same clients.
And big global companies like IBM and Accenture, they were building up their own offshore operations in India, which meant that Indian companies didn't have the same cost advantage anymore.
And Infosys knew this. They knew they had to offer more than just low-cost services. They had to move up the value chain. They had to help their clients actually transform their businesses using technology.
And that's how they came up with their Infosys 3.0 strategy. It was a bold vision for the future. It was about three things: becoming a true business transformation partner, expanding to new parts of the world beyond just North America, and offering more than just services, adding products, platforms, and solutions.
It was a big shift for them. They had to develop new skills, learn new ways of selling, even change how they thought about their business.
It wasn't easy. It's always hard to move from a service-based company to one that also has products and platforms. It takes new skills, investment in research and development, and being open to experimenting and learning from mistakes.
And the economy was still recovering, so a lot of clients were hesitant to commit to these big transformative projects. The timing was tricky. And doing all this was really complex.
By 2013, they were hitting some roadblocks. Growth had slowed down. Some important executives had left. People were worried about whether they could actually execute the 3.0 vision.
There were problems internally, disagreements about the best way forward, some uncertainty about the company's direction.
And this is when Narayana Murthy, the founder, made a really dramatic return. He came back as executive chairman. And it was controversial. Some people said it was absolutely necessary. Others thought it was a step backwards.
Murthy's return definitely shook things up. He was a powerful person, hugely respected in the company and in the industry. And when he came back, he really emphasized the core values that made Infosys successful in the first place: operational excellence, cost control, getting back to basics.
His return definitely stabilized things. But it also created some tension, especially with the CEO at the time, S.T. Shibul. They didn't always agree on strategy, leadership style, or the pace of change.
It was this clash of visions, a generational shift happening right there in the boardroom. Murthy was the old guard, the founder who built it all. Shibul was the new generation. He wanted to embrace new technologies and transform the company for the digital world.
It was a difficult time for Infosys, dealing with problems internally while trying to keep up with all the changes happening outside. But even with all that, they knew they couldn't ignore the next big wave of tech.
They knew that cloud computing, mobile tech, analytics, and social media were transforming the industry, and they couldn't afford to get left behind.
So they started investing in cloud computing, mobile app development, data analytics, social media marketing. They were getting ready for the digital future, even while they dealt with internal challenges and a tougher competitive landscape.
And one of the biggest decisions they made during this time was to look outside the company for their next CEO. Outside the group of founders.
It was a huge decision. It showed that they realized they needed a new perspective, someone who really understood the digital world.
And they ended up choosing Dr. Vishal Sikka. He had been an executive at SSP, a global software giant. Sikka was a well-known technologist. He had this bold vision for the future of Infosys. He was an expert in things like artificial intelligence, cloud computing, and design thinking.
And that marked the end of an era. It was like passing the torch to a new generation. And with Sikka coming in 2014, Infosys was ready for a whole new chapter: digital transformation.
Chapter 5, covering 2014 to 2020, is all about transformation, innovation, and of course challenges. It's about how they tried to reinvent themselves while staying true to their roots, and how they dealt with the complexities of the digital world and, well, the legacy of their founders.
Sikka came in with this idea he called new and renew. It was about revitalizing their main business, but also embracing all these new technologies, like AI and automation. He believed technology could help people reach their full potential, and that Infosys could lead the way in this transformation.
He was a visionary leader, But sometimes his vision didn't line up with how the founder saw things, and that led to tensions and disagreements that eventually affected the company's path.
Yeah, we talked earlier about some tension between Sika and Narayana Murthy. Can you tell us more about that?
Well, even though Murthy wasn't involved in the day-to-day business anymore, he was still very influential. And he had concerns about some of the decisions Sika was making, especially when it came to executive pay and how fast they were doing acquisitions. And these disagreements, a lot of them happened publicly, which created uncertainty and affected the morale of the employees.
It was like a classic clash between the old way and the new way, the founders who built the company and the leader who was brought in to change it for the future.
And in the end, all that tension led to Sika resigning in 2017. It was a turbulent time for Infosys. They were at a crossroads again.
They needed someone to steady the ship, to build on the progress they had made, and to lead them through this world that was getting more and more complex and competitive. And that's where Salil Parekh comes in.
Yeah, Parekh became the CEO in 2018. He came from Capgemini, another global IT company, so he had a lot of experience. And his style was different. He focused on getting things done well, operational excellence, building strong relationships with clients.
He knew that they had to balance innovation with stability, to keep going with the digital transformation while also listening to what the founders thought and making sure employees and investors felt confident again.
His strategy, he called it Navigate Your Next. And it was all about helping clients navigate their own digital transformation journeys.
He kept investing in important areas like cloud computing, data analytics, cybersecurity, and AI. And he made strategic acquisitions too. But he was more careful than Sika had been. He focused on companies that would make them stronger and fill in specific gaps.
And then, just as things were calming down, the pandemic hit, COVID-19, and it forced everyone, including Infosys, to change quickly and in a big way.
And they really responded well. They moved over 93% of their workforce to remote work in just a few weeks. It was incredible how quickly they adapted, and it showed that they were ready for big disruptions.
All their investments in digital infrastructure and collaboration tools really paid off. It meant they could keep things running smoothly and continue serving their clients without any major problems.
They also realized that the pandemic was speeding up digital transformation for companies in all kinds of industries. Suddenly, everyone needed to figure out remote work, get better online, and digitize everything.
And Infosys was in a perfect spot to help. They doubled down on their cloud-first approach. They launched Infosys Cobalt, which was a bunch of services and platforms designed to help companies adopt the cloud and transform digitally.
They also partnered with all the major cloud providers, which means they weren't tied to any one vendor. They could give clients the best solutions for what they needed.
And it wasn't just about the technology. They were also serious about environmental, social, and governance (ESG) issues. They became carbon neutral 30 years ahead of schedule, way ahead of the Paris Agreement targets, and they kept investing in programs to make a positive social impact.
Their campus in Bengaluru became like a model for sustainability. It's got one of the biggest corporate solar installations in the world, and they really focus on saving water and energy. They were putting their values into action, proving that sustainability and business success can go together.
They also worked hard to build a diverse and inclusive workplace. They knew that having people from different backgrounds makes a company stronger.
And they never stopped investing in training and development for their employees. They wanted to make sure their people had the skills to succeed in this fast-changing digital world. They knew that their employees were their most valuable asset and that investing in them was essential for the company to do well.
So now, as they enter their fifth decade, Infosys isn't just surviving, they're thriving. They've overcome a lot of challenges, adapted to change, and really become a leader in the digital age.
It's an inspiring story. But what about the future? What challenges and opportunities are they facing now?
Well, technology never stops changing. Things like blockchain, quantum computing, the metaverse, they're all emerging. It's exciting, but also uncertain.
And there's so much going on in the world, too. Geopolitical tensions, economic ups and downs, social unrest, all those things are going to affect the IT industry. And companies like Infosys are going to have to keep adapting and innovating.
But if we look at their past, it seems like they're well prepared to handle these challenges. They've shown that they're resilient, adaptable, and always willing to learn.
They've always been good at understanding what their clients need, and they're willing to work with them to find the best solutions. And they haven't forgotten their values. They're committed to being ethical, being socially responsible, and having a positive impact on the world.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, it's clear that Infosys' story isn't over. They're still writing it, one chapter at a time. And they're facing the future with that same spirit of innovation, determination, and a sense of purpose that they've had from the start.
Their story really is proof of the power of vision, resilience, and staying true to your values. It's a story that can inspire all of us, no matter what we do or what challenges we face.
It reminds us that success isn't just about making money. It's about building something that matters, something that makes a difference in the world.
We hope this deep dive has given you a glimpse into Infosys' journey. If you want to explore more, maybe check out Thomas Friedman's book, The World is Flat. It'll give you more context on globalization and technology. Or you could learn more about the Infosys Foundation to see all the good work they're doing in the world.
And remember, the most important lesson we can learn from Infosys is to never stop learning, never stop adapting, and never forget your values.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep diving deep.